I'm Aryeh Schwartz along with Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W. I'm very excited for this episode as we welcome Mitchell Hansen, Lynx beat reporter for Zone Coverage. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our staff's amazing written content over at winsidr.com. While you're over there, check out the Overseas Tracker. It's live now. You can see where your favorite WNBA players are playing overseas all in one place. And remember, downloading the episode makes our stats look better and allows us to continue to do this important work. Mitchell, welcome to the show. So happy to have a fellow Minnesotan on and excited to chat Minnesota Lynx with you. Before we get into all of this, I just want to know how you're doing, what you're up to, and is it still snowing in Minnesota?
Thankfully, it's not still snowing in Minnesota, but thank you guys for having me on. Right now, just kind of gearing up for, or actually wrapping up training camp, gearing up for the start of what should hopefully be an exciting WNBA season, and being able to cover that again. It'll be, I believe this will be my, I don't even remember. This tells you how good my memory is. Maybe fifth year, covering the WNBA. So I'm looking forward to it. No, I'm looking out my window right now, and thankfully there's no snow on the ground. There is green grass, and I mean it's mid 50s right now, which isn't great, but we'll take what we can get. But thanks for inviting me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course, man. I've been a longtime follower of your work, and I'm excited to talk Lynx with you. Before we get into this, tell the folks where they can find your work, see your work, and hear your WNBA ramblings.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's ramblings, zonecoverage.com. I usually have a few pieces there a week. I try and do a mailbag every once in a while as well, but just kind of a plethora of kind of coverage from features to more so, results-based stuff. But, looking forward to another year and being able to continue to provide content on that site. But there's a lot of good stuff on that site. Like I said, zonecoverage.com. So make sure to check it out there, or you can also follow along on even more ramblings on my Twitter.
Well, let's get into this. Minnesota Lynx, a team that surprised many making it to the semifinals last year, gets hopefully back a healthy Sylvia Fowles, gets arguably a steal of the draft, and makes some big free agency moves this offseason. This team is primed for success. I told Rachel before this episode, the more I dig into the Lynx, the more excited I get. So she's going to have to play devil's advocate against me a little bit on this, against you maybe a little bit on this. Rachel, I'm sure will be fine with that, right, Rachel?
I don't have a problem with that.
She loves telling me I'm wrong. But Mitchell, how do you feel about the Minnesota Lynx going into the season, and give us kind of a report of what's going down at training camp?
I think overall the feel around the team is they're excited. They're ready to go. I mean, you mentioned it. This was a team that made a relatively deep run last year in the playoffs. Put together somewhat of a surprising season down in Florida. But the work that they have done this offseason, obviously you're getting Sylvia Fowles back. That's not an acquisition by any means, but I mean, I guess it is because she sat out most of the year last year and they still had the season that they did. But you get her back healthy. Hopefully she can stay healthy for a year. That's obviously Minnesota's top priority because she is such a big piece to what they do on both ends of the floor. But then you mentioned the additions that they had this offseason. I mean, the three free agents they brought in, impressive rookie. Hopefully she's able to get back healthy here soon so that she can join the mix as well. But overall, I think the feel is they're excited, they're ready to go, and I think the expectations have kind of turned up a notch just based on what they've been able to do this offseason and kind of the work that Cheryl Reeve and company have done to retool this team and build the team into what it is, which is probably one of the deeper teams that they've had since their title runs stretching back to 2017. But overall, I think the excitement's there, and I know they, the team specifically, they don't want to get ahead of themselves too far, as every team will say at this point of the year. But I think they have their eyes set on another deep playoff run and hopefully being able to surpass what they did last year.
And I want to say, like, an advantage that this team has that most Minnesota Lynx teams that have the ability to make a deep playoff run have not had is being the underdogs. Because let's be real, and this was kind of one of the things I was texting Rachel before the show. Like, the more you look at this team, you go, holy crap, they're really deep. We'll get into what the weaknesses are because we're not going to shy over that. And I'm curious to pick your brain about that. But let's talk about this draft pick. Renai Davis injured. My understanding, no serious timetable for return, but I assume maybe you're more connected in on that. Do they have an estimation? Is there, any timetable at all that there's been spoken of? Or is it completely, when she heals, and we'll let you know?
That it's kind of been the latter of not really knowing what her timetable is for a return, which to me signals that she's going to be out for a decent amount of time. In years past, Cheryl Reeve has been pretty open about, kind of where they're at with player injuries. I know, especially last year with Sylvia Falls, for instance, Cheryl did kind of mention, every once in a while, still got in a little bit of work today, or she, things are improving with her, still not quite there yet. But, when she addressed the media following their preseason game against Atlanta, I guess you could say it was kind of a hybrid scrimmage, but after their game against Atlanta this past weekend, she kind of basically said that she doesn't know. Like they don't really know. Obviously, they know the extent of how bad the stress fracture is, but there's no really timetable. Those are kind of tricky injuries when it comes to foot injuries, let alone stress fractures in foot or feet. But I think that, to me, it signals she's going to be out for a little bit of time. It'll be really interesting to see what Minnesota does when they finalize their roster. That'll, to me, be really telling as far as exactly how long they think she'll be out. Cheryl Reeve said before the year, or coming into this year, that they're planning on carrying 11 players. Obviously, they'll have Davis out, so that leaves them 10. They're going to have a few late arrivals with Nafissa Collier and Kayla McBride. They're thinking maybe a week or two for them. So they are probably going to start the year with eight players on roster, which is obviously not a way you want to start the season ideally. But, when it comes to the roster being finalized, when it comes to Renai Davis, it'll be telling to see if they think it's more so a season injury, if they think it's more so just, something that at most would be maybe half season. It's really hard to tell, and I know right now I did actually see 20 or the age of right now social media. Renai Davis posted on her Instagram story that she was in a walking boot, so I guess that's a good sign that she's moving around, she's still active, she's not confined to I don't know, being on a couch or being completely off of it. She's able to do some stuff on it. But that's kind of the big piece right now. And then those two late arrivals will really be interesting.
Well, let's run it down real quick. I mean, appreciate you filling us in on Fia McBride. They're coming from overseas. Both teams have had great success this season, to quote Borat. But they've made it deep in the playoffs. Let's talk about this salary cap. So the team has around $162,000 available in cap. It's basically $122 for if they sign Renai Davis and Bridget Carlton. Both players don't hit their cap yet because they were either drafted or training camp contracts, which is a vet savvy move by GM Cheryl Reeve, because what that does is, they can fill their roster up with as many players as they want for training camps. So they can have a competitive training camp, especially when you're missing Fia McBride. Looking at it, I think fans can very clearly see what's kind of holding this team back from being able to have 12 players. that's a combination or arguably one of these two players. The contract of Rachel Banham, $103K, or as I said, arguably also a Chanwa is holding this team back just because of the amount of their salary. And you could easily argue, Rachel, not crazy here, that these salaries are a little bit extra for these players. I'm being polite and nice. I'm being Minnesota nice. These salaries are a little bit extra for the caliber of player they are. That's not a knock to any of them, but you look at similar players and what they're making. I mean, you could talk at Chanwa. People of her status are making around that same. But again, I want to talk about this because we're gonna skip around here now. And before we talk ceiling and floor or whatever, this kind of leads me into weakness and why this is such a big deal. And the reason is because when I think about weakness of this team, and we're going to touch all over it, I think back the point guard position, because you look at the wings, they've got depth. Don't worry about it, right? Fee can play there. You got Carlton, you got Ariel Powers, you got Kayla McBride, and I'm probably forgetting one. And heck, honestly, the big question mark is Angela Seedy might decide she wants to come over super late in the season, but we're not going to get to that unless you want to talk about that, Mitchell. But the real question, then you have such a depth at the bigs, the real question for me is the point guard position. And being in the situation they're in, the makeup of their roster, they truly have like one real backup, and that's Rachel Banham. So you could argue that's why you're giving her the big contract, but she hasn't necessarily shown the championship level caliber that I think you could argue the rest of this team has. Mitchell, I'm curious your thoughts on what the weakness of this team is. And Rachel, feel free to chime in at any point where you're like, Aryeh, you're crazy and wrong. Or Mitchell, you're crazy and wrong.
I agree with you. I think I am questioning. Sorry, Mitchell, real quick. I'm just going to chime in real fast. I think, the point guard depth in general. I mean, especially the early on parts of this season. I mean, we're no longer talking about teams with 12 players on their roster because of the new CBA and the way things are structured. More teams are playing with 11, and then you talk about the beginning of the season and, late arrivals. So as talented as this team is, and as much as we can talk about them, obviously, I think they're in contention. This team has, especially with, incredible coach who has proven to just do a phenomenal job. I do think that, this could very easily have some seriously major struggling moments. I mean, as really any team does, but I do question kind of the depth at the point guard spot to go along with just honestly depth in general. You really got to hope that people are staying healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To build off of that, I completely agree with you, Rachel, that, the one thing with this team too, you have to look at kind of what took place last year. And any team deals with this throughout the year, but injuries. Okay. Let's say Crystal Dangerfield gets hurt. What are the Lynx going to do at guard? I mean, is Rachel Banham going to be the primary ball handler? Are we going to end up seeing, Kayla McBride, maybe Nafissa Collier do a lot of, ball handling on initiating the offense? I think that might end up being the case, where we'll see a lot of Collier and McBride kind of initiating things, especially when Dangerfield's out of the game, or she's on the bench, she's in foul trouble, whatever that may be. Maybe she's hurt. But Rachel Banham's kind of a player that plays a lot of off ball. I mean, she's not somebody that really initiates the offense that much. Looking even at the team last year, they had the likes of Shanice Johnson, they had Odyssey Sims, who could kind of fill in that backup role. Obviously, they're not here anymore. But it'll be interesting. They do seem they're very wing heavy. I mean, it's you look up and down the roster, with the exception of the posts of Sylvia Fowles, Natalie Chanwa, Dantas. I mean, they're basically, the rest of them are wings, with the exception of Crystal Dangerfield. So it's interesting it will be interesting to see how it plays out. They're very versatile, but yet they're still limited kind of at the same time when it comes to especially the guard position. And that's why a lot of people maybe thought that, they would eye a guard in the draft or in free agency more so than, a wing. Like I consider McBride more so a wing than, a true guard. But, I do think that they're kind of limited in that role. And I think, it'll be a really interesting year as far as Crystal Dangerfield too, and how she can kind of last year she was more so a scorer. How can she facilitate more this year and kind of set up those wings and the post players? So I knock on wood, they're healthy at the guard position, but they can't afford any injuries at that spot this year.
For sure. We talked a little bit about things we think this team can do well. Some questions that we have. I'm curious your thoughts. If you had to pick in your mind, obviously season hasn't really started yet. We haven't really been able to have our eyes on much of anything. What do you think the biggest strength of this team will be on either end of the floor or just overall?
I think overall, basically, the biggest strength for this team, and Cheryl has talked about it a few times. Cheryl Reeve has talked about it a few times throughout training camp, and even through the off season after the free agency announcements were made. The versatility of this team. It's kind of contradicting what we were just talking about, or what I was just talking about with maybe the limitations at guard, but they are very versatile. You'll see players like I mentioned earlier, Kayla McBride, Nafissa Collier. You have Jess Shepard. You have Bridget Carlton. They can all swap between different positions. They can play multiple positions, which is a nice thing to have, especially when you have different matchups each night and throughout the season. So Minnesota will be able to play up to those matchups. And they can throw out a bunch of different bunch of different lineups and kind of fluctuate their roster however they see fit and whatever the matchup calls for that night, which I personally think that's an extremely valuable thing. And I know Cheryl Reeve has talked in years past about the importance of that and being able to fluctuate and move people around on a roster. And then you look at kind of last year with Sylvia Fowles being out. If that's the case again this year, well, maybe Minnesota ends up playing, more so small ball. We saw Nafissa Collier playing anywhere from the 2 in a starting lineup to a 4. And that's a valuable trait to have, and that's something that I think a lot of people in a lot of teams hope to have going into a year and throughout the year. So that's definitely one thing I think that plays in Minnesota's favor.
I'm just going to chime in here and say I think the consistency that we've heard from everybody on this is Cheryl Reeve. I mean, when I think about the strength, maybe it's offensive, maybe it's naive to say the strength is the coach, but we have a team that is injecting 2, maybe only 1, but I mean, we can talk about if McBride's going to start or Powers is going to start. Either way, you're injecting 2 key elements to your roster who are new players. And Cheryl Reeve, every time she's been doubted, I think last year is one of her most beautifully coached seasons of all time. And it definitely showed you Cheryl Reeve's ability to adapt to the times. And I think that's going to be a huge element with this team because what we've all talked about missing certain key players, Kayla McBride and Nafissa Collier, early on in the season, along with your rookie, Renaya Davis. And I love what you said, how we've become such a wing deep team here, because a few years back, I remember thinking about this team and how weak they were at the wing position. Mm-hmm. And now fast forward a few years and, over that time period, the wing position has been one of the hottest commodities in this league. We know we are a big driven league, right? Who are some of the greatest players of all time in our league? Lauren Jackson, Candace Parker, Sylvia Fowles, Brianna Stewart, Elena Deladon, sorry, Rachel. We can keep going with these players who are bigs, but the wing revolt has begun, and Minnesota has done an amazing job of grabbing high talented players. But the other thing, when I think Cheryl Reeve, I think defense. I mean, over the past few years, while this team has done if you want to quote Walt Hopkins, hybrid rebuild, if you want to talk about what this team did, in their ability to make this still a place that has a high standard of basketball, thanks to Cheryl Reeve, the staff, and the players. And they have outperformed. They've outkicked the coverage definitely last year, arguably the year before, and have put themselves in a position to be a place where free agents want to come. And when you do that, and you have this influx of different things, I think about Cheryl Reeve defense and how intimidating that is, and how that was really the backbone of this team for so long over this new wave of change that we've had. So that's what I think. Rachel, you're up for the next question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just want to, I mean, both of your opinions. I mean, we've kind of talked about looking at this all 12 teams and have a general idea. I mean, I want to know everyone's thoughts of ceiling and floor for this Lynx team. I think I know I have my opinion on it. I would like to hear yours. Mitchell, we'll start with you. Like, what's the ceiling for Minnesota this year, and what is rock bottom?
I think obviously the ceiling for this team is they could reach the WNBA finals. They were I mean, granted so. They got swept by a really good Seattle team last year in the postseason, but they were in the semifinals of the postseason. They kind of, to your guys' point earlier on, they kind of exceeded expectations. Considering nothing against the players that were playing on the team, but considering the talent that they had and maybe they were lacking. Sylvia Fowles was out most of the year. Kind of some of the holes that they did have on the team, the youth of the roster. They did excel at expectations last year, but it's a team that you add 3 pretty dang good free agents in the offseason, and they're going to add a lot to this team, not only with their presence off the court and kind of their veteran status and the caliber of who they are as individuals, but as players. I mean, Kale McBride, Ariel Powers, and Natalie Achonwa, they're not, we shouldn't look lightly on those additions. I think those are really key additions in some key spots for Minnesota. Adds depth, adds, really an endless amount of possibilities. So I think that, if one thing that, we had just talked about a little bit ago, and Cheryl Reeve is getting the most out of her players. That's one thing she's done year in and year out, stretching back to her championship teams. Ever since I've covered the team, that's kind of been a common storyline with Cheryl. She's the ultimate motivator. She's somebody that, we as fans maybe see, Cheryl on the sideline throwing her jacket off, yelling, screaming throughout the game, but she really knows how to pull a team together, and players love her and love to play for her. And that's something that you'll hear from every single player that plays under her. And what they're building, I think, and what they have built this offseason is a solid team that is built for the long run if they can stay healthy. And that's something that they have a good mix of youth, they have a good mix of veterans. And I think that definitely the ceiling for them would be to reach the WNBA finals. Now, do I think they would win the WNBA finals? I don't necessarily know that. I don't know if they're ready, or I'm not at least ready to say that just yet. But if they could definitely end up in a series, in the championship series, and I think that could definitely be the ceiling for them. As far as the floor, I would be incredibly shocked if they didn't reach the postseason. I think everybody would be incredibly shocked. I would say that I think the floor would be to reach where they did last year, reach semifinal round of the playoffs. I think that's definitely the minimum of their expectations, or what their expectations should be. With the additions and getting everybody back healthy, when they do get everybody, fully on this roster and kind of integrated together, I think will be really telling to see exactly what kind of team Minnesota has. And I think that they're definitely able to put a run together and not only reach their 11th straight postseason, but reach, I think, at least the semifinal round.
I'm going to be a little more hot with my take because it's 90, 80, whatever degrees in DC.
Thanks for bragging.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
But no, trust me, Minnesota summer is much better. I'm going to go championship for ceiling. I mean, look, that's the ceiling of this team. What does Cheryl Reeve do? Cheryl Reeve takes players and gets the best out of them. You have Sylvia Fowles, who has been there, done that multiple times. You have Ariel Powers, who has been there and done that, right? Like, she's been to the finals twice. She's won a finals before. So she has that experience. You can definitely counteract that, or not counteract that, that's not the right word, but it definitely kind of takes it down a little bit. Dangerfield and Fee, not necessarily having that experience, but they come from championship level pedigree at UConn. And I kind of call that a wash. And then a really smart thing that Cheryl Reeve has done throughout her career in Minnesota, and especially in the championship runs, is bring in players who have had success or who have not had success and are looking to finally get that success. Tina Charles is a perfect example of that. Someone who has had success in herself, right? But not that winning a championship success. Bringing in players like a McBride, like an Achanwa, who have had some success, maybe McBride a little bit more than Achanwa, but to be able to bring those players who are hungry to win a championship, not to say players who have won it aren't as hungry, but there's just something about someone who has never won it that gives you that extra fight just a little bit. Now, there's that other side of it of being there and understanding what to do that has that other element. So for me, the ceiling of this team is a championship. Now, if I wanted to be real bold, I would say the floor is lower than a 4 seed in this, but I'll be nice considering how closely packed the teams at the top are. And I will say if they fall out of top 5 seed, I would call that a disappointing upset of a season for this team. Maybe that's a little crazy. I just think when you have this type of talent, this type of coaching talent, it's quite, honestly, you have to have high expectations, and they've probably done a good job of flying under the radar, but that comes with positives and negatives. I mean, well, what are your thoughts, Rachel? Ceiling and floor, putting you on the spot.
I just don't think you can ever count out a Cheryl Reeve coach team. And I love the moves that were made in this offseason. I mean, I think the concerns that we spoke about earlier on the show are definitely super valid. But I mean, that's going to be the case with really any team being able to stay healthy and have depth. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we did have them in contention. I think they're definitely in the top 4 conversation. Excited to see how the new dynamic of this team shakes out. But honestly, I mean, I would be shocked if they were not a playoff team. I think you'd have to have a series of just tons of unfortunate events that would knock them out.
Wait a second. Did you just stop yourself from saying a series of unfortunate events?
Sure did. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that they're definitely a playoff team. There's no question about that. If they were to become a lottery team, that would be because you've really faced some serious injury and adversity throughout the season that nobody could have really expected.
And I think if I could jump in just for 1 second, I think one thing that I don't want to say it's overlooked, but that was a big factor from last season was the fact that Minnesota reached, they played in a series of, postseason basketball. That's huge for, Nafissa Collier. That's huge for, Crystal Dangerfield, especially those younger players that haven't had that really. To experience a series, I know that's something that they talked about throughout the series and even after the series, after they ended up losing to Seattle, is that, it's a whole different ball game when you play in in a series. It's a chess match between the other team. And I think that is prepared, maybe not to the extent of others on the team, but that has prepared, the younger players such as Dangerfield, Collier, just to, they're not playing in 1-game eliminations like they maybe have in the past and in college or with Fee and playing, getting bounced in early on in the playoffs in her first year. But I think that's something that's kind of overlooked too, is that they do kind of, although they didn't end up getting a win in the semifinal round and they got bounced in that round after losing to Seattle or being swept by Seattle, I think that's something, that experience alone will be valuable for those two especially.
And I'll always say, that series, while it was a sweep, if you remember the end of game 1, Alicia Clark gets the rebound, puts it back in. I mean, throughout that whole game, Rachel probably doesn't remember this. I remember texting Rachel saying, is this really... Are the Lynx actually about to steal game 1 against the Storm? I thought that was quite ridiculous. All right, she does remember. All right, whatever.
I remember. I for sure.
Well, because I was just completely shocked.
But they're so well coached, and they have veteran leadership, and it's just, that was, talking about we're not really anymore, but that dynasty that we talked about for so long, right? And then it was like, okay, this is now a bit of a rebuild, and the expectation was never, at least for outsiders looking in, was, okay, it's a rebuild. Like anything you do right now, is good, but like we're kind of just waiting to see like what's going to happen. And then it just kind of exceeded a lot of expectations after you've just been used to such dominance. So I think that's just a compliment to the culture and the tradition that Cheryl Reeve has really built there in Minnesota.
Oh, and no, I completely agree. And honestly, I want to ask you about a topic on that, Rachel, that we did not prepare for at all in this show. But Mitchell, you kind of pointed me in that direction, so I got to ask. First of all, I got to say, last year, the Lynx, if you're a Lynx fan, you know that calm of like, oh, we're down 5, oh, we're down 10, doesn't matter, we're coming back, or oh, we're up this amount, like game's over, we're gonna win. So I started to gain that back, that understanding and that confidence in the team. But Rachel, something that Mitchell brought up was the series aspect, and I agree that that's really big. If you've looked at the schedule, you'll notice that for this season, due to COVID protocol, there's a lot of games that are almost mini series, almost baseball-esque, where they come and they play in one location on a Friday, day off, play another game, same location, same team on Sunday, or maybe it's on Monday. I don't have the schedule right in front of me. I'm curious for you, Rachel, as a former player and former coach, talk to us a little bit about, like, do you think that is equatable to obviously a playoff series is very different, but can you kind of use that and grow from it in a similar way?
I think so. Sense. I mean, I think from my standpoint, it changes in terms of just the way you prepare and just the consistency in which you're preparing. I mean, obviously, teams are used to playing one team and then 2 days later playing someone else. So your preparation is constantly changing and evolving. Your scouting reports are constantly changing and evolving. You have your scouting reports amongst your staff that are, really divvied up just like throughout the week, and it's kind of a rat race in terms of just getting that done in time. So now, you're playing these kind of back-to-backs, and you're really honing in on opponents like you would in a series. So it is going to be, and this is a really good point, it's going to be really interesting because, like, from that first game to when they play that second game in any given matchup, we're really going to get a chance to see adjustments that we don't typically get to see in the regular season. What sort of things did they go back in the film room and talk about after that first game, and what adjustments or personnel changes or matchup changes did they make for the second game? And so we as media and outsiders kind of get to analyze that, which is going to be fascinating. And at this point, I mean, it does prepare you for the postseason. And when you get into those series, I definitely think that's a great point and very unique to this year. Because I mean, I certainly don't ever remember this happening before. So that's kind of what it's going to be. Getting used to playing someone back to back and really honing in on them for at least a consistent week is going to be really cool.
It's going to be really interesting and something that WNBA fans have not really experienced. And shout out to the teams who haven't made the playoffs recently or have struggled to make it to a series. You're finally going to get a series. Let's talk key players. We're going to go down the line, starting with Mitchell, Rachel, and myself. Key player for this team to reach the ceiling. Key player who, if they don't perform, we're going to see the team shift more closely to the floor. Mitchell, who you got?
I think, and this is a player that Cheryl Reeve has talked about a lot since her arrival to Minnesota, being the center point or centerpiece of this team, and that's Sylvia Fowles. I think that her ability, I mean, take the free agent additions out of it. She's been the common theme, since she got here in 2015, that she is the focal point of this team, no matter who is on the team. Cheryl's often talked about, going through her, the offense runs through Syl, the offense, everything runs through Syl. The more she does, the more successful everybody else is. And I think that's going to be the case again this year. The reason I think that it'll be especially important this year is her health. Obviously last year she sat out most of the year with injury issues. Hopefully this year she's able to get back being fully healthy, and she can remain healthy throughout the year. If she is, I think they'll do extremely well. If she doesn't, I think they could struggle. Now they did add a Chanwa, and they do have some backup depth behind Syl that'll help more so than what they did last year. But when Syl's not on the floor, this is a very different team, and I think that she's going to be the key factor of this team this season, and as long as she's still in a Lynx uniform.
Rachel, hot seat.
This one's tough. Like I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this player. Oh no, I'm gonna do this player. No, I'm gonna do this one. So this one's really hard. I'm not gonna copy Mitchell and say Syl. Shout out to Sylvia Fowles. Love her. Hope she has a phenomenal year. Hope she's healthy. But for me, it's Crystal Dangerfield. She's the engine that makes this team go from the point guard position. And I think what she was able to come out and do in that rookie season was, I'm a huge Dangerfield fan, and I really felt like I studied and analyzed her game from even when she was in high school. So, I mean, I'm not going to say I wasn't surprised that she had the year that she had, but, how does that translate now to that sophomore season where, you've got a target on your back, everyone is aware of you, everyone is gunning for you. How is she able to translate that rookie year to her sophomore season, and can she elevate her game to that next level, to really be the facilitator, the creator, the engine of this team that they need him to be. And we already talked about the depth at that position. So there's a lot riding on her shoulders. I know she'll 100% embrace that, and she's built for that. But Dangerfield is, in my opinion, the X factor for this team and their success.
Oh, yeah. And, speaking to the film that we've been talking about all episodes, speaking to the growth of Dangerfield, I mean, teams are definitely going to see her struggle at the high double team. So the high double team trap, like that's going to be something that she's going to need to know how to get out of in a consistent basis. But, kind of what you were saying, Rachel, about how you could go through this whole roster and say, this is the most important, this is the most important, this is the most important. She needs to be aware of that. So just to add to what you're saying, for me, I was thinking Powers, I was thinking McBride, because of they're in the new players coming to the team. They can add that element that maybe this team has lacked in the past few years. But I think I need to go with Old Faithful over the past few years, and that's Nafissa Collier. We've continued to see her grow, but the real question is, this coming season, is she going to make that leap to be a real MVP candidate? And if she does that, to Mitchell's point, if Sylvia goes down, all of a sudden, that's so much more weight on Fee's shoulders. To Rachel's point, with Dangerfield, having that a player of Fee's caliber playing at a very high level with or without Syl means you can't do that high trap. And if you can't do that high trap, that makes it that much easier for the other players around. And I think it's really, to Mitchell's point about how the offense kind of flows through Syl. When Syl's moving, the offense is moving. I don't think you can just plug Fee into that position. But similarly, we saw points during the season where this offense this past year get kind of stagnant. And I think a lot of that had to do with not getting Fee the ball, not motion. So for me, it's Nafissa's growth. And it no matter what happens around her, if she can continue to grow like we have seen her from her rookie year to today, we should expect a team that kind of blows through the roof of that ceiling, shatters the glass ceiling, whatever cool, smart phrase we could have come up with that I did not write down beforehand, and that's my own fault. Mitchell, remind everybody, we're so appreciative of you making the time to join us today. Remind everyone where they can see your writings and Twitter ramblings.
Yeah, absolutely. You can check out, content at Zone Coverage. That is zonecoverage.com. And then you can also follow me on Twitter. Twitter handle is M_Hansen13, and that's Hansen, that's spelled with an E-N, so Hansen.
Is 13 a shout out to one Lindsay Whalen, or just totally random connected?
I was actually born on the 13th, so that's my favorite number. But her and I have that I think in common. Lucky 13.
There you go.
Maybe people aren't feeling so lucky if they're following me on Twitter, just because some of the stuff I post is like, why am I following this guy? But no, I'm just joking. Love
Mitchell,
Lindsay
we're
well.
very-
No, she's awesome.
Oh, she's amazing, and I believe she like coached the spring training football game, and they won. Whatever.
Yeah.
Long tangent, not worth it. Mitchell, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. Everyone, make sure you read Mitchell's stuff. I read it to get to know what the hell is going on in Minnesota, as I'm now thousands of miles away. So, thank you, Mitchell. Have a great night.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it.